Hi, I'm Barbara Sweeney and we're in the kitchen at Vaucluse House with some very special guests today to talk about the Batterie de Cuisine that's held here. It's a collection of 137 pots and pans and moulds, all made in copper. And I don't know, as a cook, have you ever seen a copper collection in a museum, a collection of copper saucepans, and just got massively excited? Well, I have, and I know that both of our guests have had that experience as well in their travels. So who we have here today is Jacqui Newling.
Hi, Barbara.
Hello, darling. Is our colonial gastronomer in Sydney. Jackie's got an academic interest in the food of the colonial period, and she's also a curator with Sydney Living Museums, and they are the people who look after this house as well as other historic houses in New South Wales. And John Cunnington, welcome.
Okay. John
is a specialist dealer in wine and food antiques, and he too has got a thing for copper and has got moments in his travel life where copper struck you with.
Dominated my life.
Dominated your life. So let's start out, Jacqui, by giving everyone who's joined us today on the video a bit about this kitchen. Tell me about the history of the kitchen.
So we're here today in the kitchen that was built by the Wentworth family when they lived here in the 1820s, early 30s. And you can tell by, this echo chamber, it is quite substantial. The Wentworths were big thinkers, but they also had a big family. So they had 10 children, they had many domestic staff. So this would have been a hive of industry. It would have been a hot, sweaty, smelly, active place.
All right, well, let's turn our attention to the copper pots and wares in the room. The Batterie de Cuisine is obviously a French term to describe the collection. John, what does that mean?
Well, Batterie de Cuisine literally means kitchen artillery. And it's a good example of wines, of words that go from French into English that don't make a lot of sense or don't exactly mean what they say. So the Batterie de Cuisine covers all the moulds, saucepans, paraphernalia in the kitchen, whisks, sieves, knives, all the smaller items, but it doesn't extend to sort of sideboards or stoves or anything like that. So it's all the paraphernalia that's used in preparing meals, basically.
Including spoons, cutlery, that kind of thing?
Yeah, all cutlery, spoons, everything, yeah. So the copper pots are really a specialist field within that. And that's why they're so special, because of the social history attached to them and a whole range of other reasons.
And artillery, does that have any kind of, the word I'm looking for is escaping?
No, I just think it's an unusual
artillery,
conversion
okay.
From English to French. French to English.
I've got a comment on that though.
Yeah.
Because in the late 18th century, kitchens became quite organised and set up like a military operation. So chefs like Anton and Carême, for example, had brought about this sort of systematic way of cooking, and that's why these days we have sous chefs and all the pastry chefs and all the different specialties. And they were like a little miniature army, and everybody knew their place and worked strategically with each other to produce a meal at the right time.
And Escoffier extended the word to brigade. So he had a kitchen brigade, which was the next leg of the setup Carême had.
Yes. And the skill in that is that ability to specialise in an area. So the saucier, or the person who's on fish or meat, gets very good at the task they're doing, and you can create so much more with that team of people all focused on a particular task. So let's turn our attention to copper. What is the allure of copper, John?
The main attraction of it is its ability to conduct heat very quickly, 20 times more than stainless steel, for example. So it's a very good conductor of heat, a very even conductor of heat, and it also will hold heat evenly. So it's very much sought after by chefs, historically, going back to, I'd say, the mid-18th century, right through to today. So all the best restaurants in France, and perhaps in Australia as well, have copper saucepans, pots, pans, and various other pieces of equipment for cooking. So it's really the utility of it and the conductivity of it, that's the main thing. Recognising it won't work on an induction stove.
Yeah, yeah. For me, it's always been an aesthetic appeal, but I've been put off by what it takes to keep them shiny and clean. And we're looking at a collection here, or some of the items here, Jacqui, that aren't polished up. Can you talk about that?
Yes, certainly. So these date back to the 1890s. They're obviously on display in our museum and have tarnished over time. They've dulled in time. Now, if we had the resources to polish them on a daily basis, and look, it's not nice work. You have to. They would use salt and lemon juice or some kind of acid, sort of vinegar or something like that. It certainly wasn't the palm olive that you're soaking in it. So it's quite abrasive, and these days, certainly, if we've got a collection of 137 items, we'd need someone pretty much full time to keep them up to the peak. The highest mark.
That's why silver cutlery's gone out of vogue, and we've all got stainless steel, just the polishing and the maintenance of it. But these aren't being used to cook anymore. Just going back to that idea, John, about its conductivity and the evenness of the heat, what's also fantastic about copper is it also cools down very quickly. So it needs to be on the heat source to maintain its heat distribution. And I think chefs love that control. Yes. Particularly in the area of sauces, that you can cool down very quickly. And as a domestic cook, that kind of level of that finesse isn't something we think about when we're cooking the family dinner, is it?
And remember, sauces were probably done in little pots, set in a bain-marie, ready to be used. So a chef in a restaurant, for example, would have 8 or 10 small casserole saucepans with lids that he would choose the sauce for. And Jacqui showed me earlier one shot where the labels were actually on the lids.
Oh yeah,
of the sauces.
So just to go back and explain the bain-marie, that large, what looks like a roasting tin to me, is filled with
a bath of water. And
a bath of water.
Have your pots in it so they don't burn and they keep warm, and the sauces are protected.
What are some of the sauces that might be in the bain-marie?
Well, again, we're talking about this sort of more high-end cookery. So the classic French sauces, so sauce béarnaise, hollandaise, all those sort of creamy sauces.
All the emulsions.
Exactly. And if you had a very delicate sauce that you needed to keep warm, you could, rather than just have it in the pot, you could, like we've got here, you could sit a ceramic pot, like a little double boiler, and then it wouldn't stick to the sides and that sort of thing. So to convert that into an Australian sense as well, it could also help keep things cool. So on a, rather than, we've sort of been talking restaurants, but if you're talking a large household, the dining room is several rooms away. There's a lot going on. People entertained at home, and sometimes, there might be 12 or 15 dishes to go in a course. We're talking dining à la française, where everything sort of comes out on the table together. So that idea of coordinating the meal and having everything ready at the same time. This setup helps you, make things one thing at a time, and then you can get on with the next one, because how do you make, a dozen dishes on one stovetop? So it was quite resourceful. In summer, you could fill it with cold water, and that way you could have your mayonnaise or something like that, keeping cool on a hot day.
It kind of goes to explaining why there's 137 items in this particular battery. Is that common, that kind of number of saucepans?
Well,
or pans
yes.
or pots?
Well, it also includes the lids. So
right.
often you'll find I can show you actually. I have to don gloves when we handle the copper, because the oils in our skin are bad for the
I was going to say, this is the curator coming out in here. This is
the curator, yes. I'm under...
The cook's disappearing for the moment.
It'd be quite different at home, wouldn't it? But, for example, in this pot here, it has, she bravely says, I don't know if you can zoom in, number 33 on here, and the lid is also stamped with number 33. So each different item is numbered, partly so you knew what went with what, but also these are very expensive items. And it would be up to the housekeeper or the head cook, head of the kitchen, to sort of stock take, do an audit in case someone's pilfered, purloined.
And if they're expensive, you're going to take particular care of them, I would imagine.
Yes, that's right. So,
And have them re-tinned once the tin wears off, but we'll come back to that.
Yeah, well, in fact, that's a perfect time to talk about re-tinning. So what we've got is a pot that's been made by, it wouldn't have been a blacksmith, it would have been a metal worker of some
Metal
description.
worker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who made saucepans?
I haven't seen any makers earlier than 1820 in the records that I've read about in France. So that must have been round about that period the manufacturers started to produce them. Having said that, there must have been moulds earlier than that for some of the fancy centerpieces that were used in cooking in the palaces or with very expensive
I think the
wealthy
key word would be
families.
manufacturer. So you're talking about
People actually made the
industry
saucepans.
as opposed to a craftsperson that might have been
Yeah, I
making
think
them
so.
on a
Yeah,
small scale.
manufacturers. Yeah. So the people that made this, for example, the Hellerin, they started in 1820, and there was a number of makers around about that same period who you'll still find with their name on the pots. So
And that's a French maker, isn't it?
yes, yeah.
and that's probably once they started being retailed in a way. So again, copper was very, specialist craft, but
yeah.
also very expensive. So you'd only find aristocracy or perhaps royalty having copper pans, and that's why in houses like this, where in Australia, that sort of social hierarchy, that social climb was very important. If you had copper pots in your kitchen, even though other people may not see them, it was a sign of wealth and status. So you found retailers and manufacturers as the 19th century, the middle class, if you like, as the middle class sort of came into being, they wanted to be seen to be buying from the best shops. So all those brands and labels and things, became a sign of your status.
Yeah, exactly.
Now we have an example here. We just mentioned tinning and re-tinning them. Can you take us through what that means, John?
Well, because of the dangers of copper being exposed to food, the inside of most saucepans or vessels are tinned to protect the food from the copper. And it's a process of really just putting tin all through the pot, and the only exception is it's not done for items that are going to, for example, caramelise sugar. Because the melting point of caramelised sugar is 300 or 400 degrees centigrade, and for tin it might be 200. So that example there is a good example of one that's made for sugar and is not tinned.
And the other exception for not tinning a bowl is a bowl that would be used to whip egg white, because egg white responds beautifully the tinning would oxidise the egg and discolour it.
Yeah.
But it is such a magic thing that the amount of volume of air that you can put into egg white in a copper bowl is significantly more than any other bowl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're usually very big. Yeah.
We've got this little miniature one here, which might do one egg white.
Yeah.
But again, because it's not tin lined, you can see the verdigris
forming. Yes. Yeah.
forming,
Yeah.
and that's what you don't want to have contact with most foods, because it can discolour the food, but it can also induce copper poisoning. So, hence the need for the tin lining. These days, we can get often when we buy stainless steel saucepans, they'll have a copper base, which gives you the benefit of that heat distribution, but the food should never contact the copper, so we have stainless steel.
And contemporary saucepans are still lined.
But invariably the tin wears off, so then you have the process of having them re-tinned or re-tinned and cleaned at the same time, which is, or can be quite expensive depending on the size and the amount of tinning that's needed. But to have something like that re-tinned, this size would be in the order of about $200. and polished at the same time, or just have it polished might be $70 or $80. So it's not crazy, but it's not inexpensive really.
Yeah.
Not when
yeah.
you've got to multiply it by 137.
Exactly right, yeah.
But that's also those artisan crafts of working with copper, of tinsmiths. We're all very familiar with blacksmiths,
Yes.
who use the forge and the heavy iron material. You had silversmiths, but you also had tinsmiths. So that idea of the tinker, tinker tailor,
soldier sailor.
Yes.
Oh, which is your example there, which is a fantastic example.
So you would find often a tinker would come around to your house, so a travelling salesman really, or travelling craftsman. And so you might find that once every year or whatever, he'd come round and repair any pots that needed help. With a little sort of portable workshop or set-up shop locally. This is one of my very favourite items in our entire collection.
Really good, yeah.
It's quite a humble piece. It's a little sauce pot, of course, and you can see it has been repaired quite clumsily, really. But you can see the sort of nails, copper nails have gone in. He's put an extra layer here. So at some point this saucepan has been dropped, or probably dropped and cracked around the edge. But what I love about it is someone cared enough about this pot to repair it, and perhaps this was even perhaps not from a professional tinker. It is a little crude. But it also reminds us today we live in such a disposable society. If something breaks, we go to IKEA or Woolworths or whatever and buy another one. And so I think it's that sense of value is really important reminder
and it
for the
goes
past.
to the economy of it as well.
Yes.
But I feel incredulous that you would repair a saucepan, for instance. But as you say, that's exactly what you need to do to keep it all ticking along. It's going to be much cheaper to repair it than replace it, particularly given the original selling price is so high.
Well, you imagine ceramic plates that crack and they put them together with wire clips. Clips are heated, then there's a cool, pulls the material together, and you've got a...
Yes, it's almost like a staple,
through the ceramic. It's very clever.
Yeah.
And we find
that was the same thing, someone going around homes, I guess, and doing these jobs for people.
We find that a lot in our items in our collection.
Oh,
We've got a lovely little eel dish that has staples through it.
Yeah.
That again shows you the value of that little dish
little item,
to care for it.
Or just as you say, the respect for the item. Look, we've mostly talked about the pots in this collection, and there's different, like why an oval pot, and
why a pot like that?
Yeah,
A
that's right.
poissonnière for a fish,
Yeah,
or a turbotière for a turbo, which is like a sole, or a jambonnière, which is shaped like a big leg of ham. So they're specifically designed for whatever's going to be cooked in them, like a dovière for a big chunk of meat.
which explains again the volume of saucepan.
You don't see them in England so much. You see them more in France, those bigger sized pots, including things like stock pots, which could be up to 200 litres for big hotel kitchens.
So how do you get them from one side of the kitchen to the other?
Well, and in this collection there are some much larger pieces that really would have just occupied too much space on this table. I mean, this is sort of a medium size of that oval shape. There's one that's really quite substantial. And we don't, people might have an oval casserole dish, as you say, normally a French brand, but we tend to do everything in round vessels now. But, people, particularly the English, boiled a lot of meat as well as roasting. So to boil a leg of lamb, to boil a hand of pork, pickled pork, something like that, you needed that oval shape. Otherwise it would have to stand vertically. I know I cooked a calf's head for work, as you do, and because I couldn't find an oval pot big enough, it sort of made sense.
Because
why
cows have very big heads.
They do, long snouts. So, that idea of needing an oval pot, suddenly having oval pots really made sense to me when I had to go and find a caterer's pot to stand it up in. So, yes, the way we cook, the nature of the way we cooked has changed along with the types of food we cooked. And we don't tend to cook, if we're cooking a really big piece of meat these days, we'd probably roast it.
Yeah.
Or do it on the barbecue.
And that's the thing about what you're cooking on. So most of our cooktops are round heat sources, or you might get a fish burner, you know, a long fish saucepan or a wok burner. But it all goes hand in glove, doesn't it?
Years ago in France at auction, it's impossible to believe this, I saw a fish kettle, a poissonnière, that was as long as this table.
Wow.
So I'm thinking they must have had big
So
pike or big eels in those days. It's amazing. And a lid, all in copper.
Wow. And how big your stove must have been.
Exactly. Well, it'd be like one of those pianos they have in the big restaurants. It's sort of the different heats levels along the top.
Yeah, or a lot of little fires. Let's turn our attention to the moulds.
Yes.
What would they have been used for?
So we've got a beautiful display of moulds behind us. I've got a couple out here on the table. Many of them would have been used for cakes. This one's a ring mould. You can see it's got the gap inside. So you would fill that perhaps with jelly, sweet or savoury. When you turn it out, you could fill the centre with fresh berries or fruit or, something of a different texture. Sometimes rice and things like that were moulded, and you'd serve a little sort of casserole or curry or something on the side.
Incredibly elaborate.
It is, isn't it? It's highly sort of architectural, really, and that movement for these sculpted dishes started at the late 18th century and caught on, throughout the 19th century, and again as the middle class emulated royalty. What I love about this one is it has a pigeon pear.
Yeah, wow.
So you could make
great,
jellies or, perhaps a flummery, which is a milk jelly, around the base, and then you could put a clear jelly on top. So often the moulds and pots and things work together in harmony.
Now I'm just thinking about, when you were just talking about that eel vessel, what are some of the amazing things you've seen at auction come up that are copper?
The most amazing, we'll call it, purchase I've ever made was at auction one day, and there was a trolley with I'd say 150 to 200 litre stock pot on it in copper, and a few other pots scattered on the trolley. And as you do, you sort of put your hand up and you buy these things and you pay for them. But what I hadn't realised is that when the goods came to Australia in the container, because you don't see them, they go off to the auction house and you give some guy in a cafe a docket and it magically appears in Australia 2 or 3 months later, there was another 2 complete trolley loads of copper, all unrestored, that gave me 75 items of copper. It was the most amazing collection I've ever seen. But interestingly, when they were all clean, at relatively expensive price, there was cafe names like Maison Chevet, which was Escoffier's restaurant in Palais Royal.
Oh, fantastic.
Café Gerbois, which was where the Impressionists first started to meet. All the names of old makers, the Tang, Gaillard, de Hillerin, which gave you a whole lot of social history because the dates or the marks from the makers had addresses that could give you where they were at the time.
Yeah.
And they went right back to 1820s, 1830s, which is just fantastic. And that was my Olympics window in 2000. The most amazing thing.
Wonderful
And
find.
It was amazing. There was one of these completely intact with, must have had 12 saucepans, little acorn tops on the lids.
Oh, beautiful.
Fantastic.
The,
Most of those went to restaurants.
Yeah, well, as you say, that's where they're valued in the restaurant for all of those qualities that we have spoken about, but also just the aesthetic beauty of them. And I remember even at the Opera House, they would serve certain things in little copper saucepans, like beautiful mash on the table in a beautiful copper saucepan. I just think they add such a beautiful layer to a kitchen, and they're so lovely to look at, and to the idea of seeing someone's history in that, the tinker, the owner. That's why visiting places like this is so important, because it tells us about another time and another life and people and what they did. And these would have been used every day and enjoyed by this family. So thanks for coming in.
And part of the attraction for people buying them for home is as much as a display, I'm sure. as to
Yes.
cooking with them, because they know what a mess they get into once they cook them, and they have to have them re-tinned, and where do you get that done. But there are websites you can go to for re-tinning, one in Tasmania, one in Balmain, that'll give you the way of calculating what it will cost to have it done, which is pretty
Handy
useful,
tool.
really. Yeah.
Jacqui, that's a number you might want to take note of.
Yes, we might need that. Thank you so
No, look,
much.
it's been great. It's been great talking. Even like all we've done is scratch the surface of copper today, not literally, but it's been great talking to you guys.
Oh, thank
Thanks
you.
very much for coming in.
Thanks,
No, that's
Barbara.
great, very interesting. Thank
Thanks,
you.
John.